I mean,
Oops.
nobody joining us today?
Yeah, there's Ian.
Nobody go?
Hey, Guido.
Okay.
Hey, Alan.
Hey, how are you doing, Ian?
Pretty good. A little
You're
wet.
looking wet.
Yes,
Oh,
it is.
it's too summery here. I led a mindfulness walk yesterday, and I was just soaking by the end, and not because of the weather. Well, because of the weather, not because of any wetness. It was just so hot. I keep on. I normally like to lead them every 2 weeks, and in the summer, I just have been looking at the temperatures and going no. And I thought it would be better this week, but it wasn't. It was quite warm yesterday.
You like that?
Right now.
No, I'm not a fan of the real heat. I don't hate it like I used to. I realized that I hated a quarter of the year, and that was silly. So, and it's becoming more than a quarter of the year now that at least this summer, with the weather that we've had some really, really sustained hot weather. It dipped down to normal about Tuesday when I decided to set up the mindfulness walk yesterday. And then by Saturday, it was just sweltering again. So has it been raining a lot there in Portland, Oregon?
No, just today. Today
Just
we
today.
had a big storm came in off the coast and kind of tearing through town.
Okay. Looks like Ben is joining us. He may just be listening because he's in residence. Hi, Ben. Your microphone's turned off, and he's in, where is he? He's in Virginia, I believe, which is very close to North Carolina, very, very close to South Carolina, very close to that now tropical storm Florence. I talked about it on Friday night, and it was blue skies, and they had apparently told the university for Thursday and Friday that classes were canceled, and they didn't need to because the storm just came and sat where it seems to be sitting in South Carolina. They thought it was going to come inland and then move up. And I mean, we're scheduled in Toronto to get the tail end of it sometime in the middle of the week, Thursday, Friday, if it starts moving. From Ben, yeah, he said, hey guys, for today I can only listen. I guess he must be on duty or whatever. So at any rate, so we're doing good. How's the inner work going? Ian, any comments?
Also good. Nothing new since we talked last week.
Okay.
Sort of maintaining so far.
Maintaining.
Mm-hmm.
Guido, I know that, Guido has his cancer's returned, so he's in a lot of pain and he's taking pain medication. But are you still able to do the inner work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I love the 60 bone exercise. I'm doing it.
That's the hands and fingers one, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do that. It's really easy, but I do it. Sometimes I forget it for 5 or 10 minutes, and I continue doing it. I remember where I was.
Yeah, yeah. Let's do, I've got these all on, that now that they're recorded. Let me see if we can just all do, and this is a 60-point exercise. This is Mr. Gurdjieff, or not Mr. Gurdjieff, this is J.G. Bennett's exercise. So I'm just going to do it. So I want people to be aware that these things are available online. They're on my YouTube channel, torontohypnotherapist.com. I have a playlist that's called Exercises in the Gurdjieff Tradition. And this is J.G. Bennett's 60-point exercise. So we go down 30 points in one side of the body, and we come up 30 points in the other side of the body. And I have to say, as soon as I posted this on Facebook, within like a minute of posting this on Facebook, someone sends me, replies to one of the groups that I posted on and said, this isn't the 60-point exercise that I know. And I love how that happens, these synchronicities. And this person who said that, I said, okay, tell me the one that you have. And we exchanged quite a few private messages, and he apparently learned one that is very similar to this one, but he learned it through Robert Fripp, who is a very famous guitarist and who actually studied with J.G. Bennett in Sherborne House. So I learned this one. I know that this one is authentic. It comes from the Bennett tradition, the one that I'm sharing with you. And at some point in the future, I will do version 2. So we will have 2 versions of the 60-point exercise here for us to do. It's very similar, except rather than coming down the front and then coming down the back, it focuses more on the joints and bones and stuff like that. But it's still the same sequence, down the one side, up the other. And he learned it at a guitar workshop he took in 1992 and shared it with me. But so we'll do the one that I was taught years ago. So let me just. Okay.
The 60-point self-sensing exercise, attributed to J.G. Bennett. Starting at the crown of your head, breathe in awareness and breathe out tension. And as you move through each point, breathe in awareness and breathe out tension. The right side of your forehead, your right eye, the right side of your nose and face, your right ear and the right side of your head, the right side of your mouth and jaw, the right side of your throat and neck, your right shoulder, your right upper arm and elbow, your right lower arm and wrist, the top of your right hand, your right thumb, your right index finger, your right middle finger, your right fourth finger, your right baby finger, your right palm, the right side of your chest and solar plexus, the right side of your abdomen and pelvis, the right side of your upper back, the right side of your lower back, your right hip and buttock, your right upper leg and knee, your right lower leg and ankle, the top of your right foot, your right big toe, your right second toe, your right third toe, your right fourth toe. The 60-point self-sensing, the 60-point.
Oops, I'm sorry.
The bottom of your right foot and heel. Now reversing this process and breathing in awareness and breathing out tension from your left heel and the bottom of your left foot, your left baby toe, your left fourth toe, your left third toe, your left second toe, your left big toe, the top of your left foot, your left ankle and lower leg, your left knee and upper leg, your left buttock and hip, the left side of your lower back, the left side of your upper back, the left side of your pelvis and abdomen, the left side of your solar plexus and chest, your left palm, your left baby finger, your left fourth finger, your left middle finger, your left index finger, your left thumb, the top of your left hand, your left wrist and lower arm, your left elbow and upper arm, your left shoulder, the left side of your neck and throat, the left side of your jaw and mouth, the left side of your head and your left ear, the left side of your face and nose, your left eye, the left side of your forehead, and finishing at the crown of your head.
Yeah, my apologies there. There was some kind of distortion coming from someone's speakers in the background, so I had to mute us all, and I accidentally stopped it for a second. Whoops, saying the Zoom can't. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, good. It was just telling me a second ago it couldn't hear me. I want to continue this, not with a 60-point exercise. This is someone, Michael from Perth, Australia. He's working, getting up at 4 in the morning, and these meetings end at midnight his time. So I was talking to him yesterday. He sent me some information that he acquired on the net that came from the Willem Nyland group in Willem Nyland. So let's just do our best to enter into our right arm. So to become aware of our right arm from our shoulder down to the tips of our fingers, to sense our right arm as fully and as completely as we can. And then just leave that alone and sense your right leg. Become aware of your right leg as fully and completely as you can. Sensing your right leg from your hip down to the tips of your toes. And then stop doing that and enter as fully as you can into your left leg. Sensing your left leg from your hip down to your toes. And then leave your left leg alone and enter into your left arm, entering into your left arm as fully as you can, sensing your left arm from your shoulder down to the tips of your fingers. And then leave that alone, and we're going to circle through our limbs, around our body, and this is supposed to have some kind of a magnetic resonance on our solar plexus. So we just become aware of a single limb at a time. So become aware of your right arm. Then become aware of your right leg. Then become aware of your left leg. Then become aware of your left arm. Your right arm. Your right leg. Your left leg. Your left arm. Your right arm. Your right leg. Your left leg. Your left arm. Your right arm. Your right leg. Your left leg. And finishing with your left arm. And then do your best to become aware of your whole body, to sense your whole body as one organic whole. Perhaps we can do Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. As a vessel fills with warm golden honey, fill with sensations starting in your toes, and then filling with sensation from your toes to your heels, and then from the bottom of your feet all the way up to your ankles, all the way up to your knees, up to your hips and hands, up to your midriff, elbows, middle back, all the way from the bottom of your feet up to your shoulders, your upper arms, and all the way from the bottom of your feet up to your neck, to the top of your neck, and then to the top of your skull, the top of your head, sensing your entire body from the bottom of your feet all the way up to the top of your head. And Willem Nyland gave a slightly different instruction for breathing. And this is when we get into the state of sensing our body, when we get into this awareness of our body. What he instructed his students to do with particular exercises, this is not something that we should globalize into all exercises. But when we develop an awareness of the body and we can get the body into a relaxed state, there are 2 points where we should use one point where we should silently or softly say the word am, and another point where we should say the word I. So I am. And as we breathe in, and then as we breathe out, if you pay attention to your breathing, as you breathe in, there comes a point where you stop breathing in and you enter into a brief space before you breathe out. And then as you breathe out, you enter into a brief space before you begin to breathe in again. So as you breathe in, when you get into that space, you say the word I, just at the end of the in-breath. And as you breathe out, when you get to that place where you breathed out and before you begin to breathe in again, you say am. So breathing in and then saying I at the end of the in-breath, and then breathing out and saying am at the end of the out-breath. And let's do this for, let's say, a minute roughly, just quietly focusing on our breath, breathing at our own natural rhythm, and saying I at the end of the in-breath and am at the end of the out-breath. And then just allow your attention to rest. And as the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, we too are surrounded by an atmosphere. Mr. Gurdjieff said it was perhaps a meter and a half. Perhaps it's like a bubble around ourselves. Become aware of the limit of your atmosphere. Keep your atmosphere contained within this boundary. Keep your atmosphere still, calm, tranquil. Mr. Gurdjieff said that this atmosphere is actually composed of our sensations, our feelings, our thoughts. When we identify with something, our atmosphere goes to that place of identification. If we think of our mother, it goes to where our mother is, even though she could be halfway around the world. So it's important to keep this atmosphere collected, calm, tranquil, to become aware of the boundary, about a meter and a half, 4 or 5 feet around us. Keep it tranquil and still. And at the end of all of our inner exercises, it's important to become aware of the atmosphere, this collected state. And at the count of 3, we're going to breathe in the atmosphere into ourself and imagine something, some part of it remains within us as we breathe out. 1, 2, 3. Breathe the atmosphere in, and then as we breathe out, imagine, represent to ourselves that some part remains within ourselves. And then it's always good to end with an affirmation. So silently in your mind, repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated in me for my being. And then Mr. Gurdjieff also said it's very important to maintain the collected state, to not rush off after we do our inner work, to maintain it. So just make sure, whenever you do the inner work, that you don't rush off, you don't disappear, you don't get lost in thoughts, that you take a moment to maintain and remain aware of yourself. Let me just try and move this over. So after the completion of this particular cycle, the right arm, right leg, left arm. And this is Willem Nyland's words. This is transcripts. Don't forget that it has to be done exactly in that way, starting from the right arm, ending with the left arm. It can be continued for another cycle around if you wish. It is not always necessary. It has to go from the right arm to the right leg, to the left arm, because it produces a certain dynamic quality around one's solar plexus. And he says, I don't want to go into detail why it is necessary, but it makes oneself more attuned, as it were, to the possibility of later receiving, by means of this exercise, different kind of forms of food from a different level. You know what I received yesterday, a wealth of information. I will turn it into exercises like the ones that I put online, so that we can all benefit from it. You know, as I made it clear, my goal is to begin to share these exercises with people. And it's interesting how the further I walk down the path, suddenly things are presented to me, given to me. It's time to bring this inner work out into the open. I believe that we are living in a sort of end times. The parts per million of carbon in our atmosphere has reached a catastrophic level. Even if we stopped producing carbon now, global warming would continue for years. If global warming continues as it is, they're talking about we might actually see a Category 6 hurricane, which has never been experienced on this planet. There are all sorts of problems that we humans are causing. And Mr. Gurdjieff said that the solution isn't at the lower ends of humanity. The real solution is that humanity has grown out of balance. And the solution to our problems comes from growing the higher end of humanity. And we cannot grow just by reading In Search of the Miraculous and reading books and becoming acquainted with theories. The way we grow our being is through inner exercises. So I think it's important. These are incredible exercises. The deeper I dig into them, the more I go into them, the more incredible they seem. And there's lots of these hidden exercises in the Gurdjieff tradition that is out there, that's available, that people have held on, they've kept in secret. But I firmly believe that it's very important that people begin to start doing inner work. When we grow our being, we are not just doing it for ourselves. We are doing it for our fellow human beings, and we are doing it for the earth herself. Any comments on the 60 point, the revolving around our arms?
I had a question on the revolving around the arms and legs. Something in the piece that you read from the PDF seemed to kind of imply that you should do it like once or twice around.
Well, I mean, he said you do it. Well, it came at the end of a much longer exercise that I didn't want to do today. Okay. Something he called the draining exercise, which is a really interesting exercise. You know, rather than relaxing the muscles, it's imagining that this liquid is draining out. And he says that this exercise takes about 15 minutes. And, you know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it apart myself, figure out what it is. and then I will, preview it here. I'll preview it in my group live, my live group, and then I will create a YouTube video with it, with the full and complete exercise. But we've been doing, with the Georgia D exercise, we were filling the right arm with sensation and holding that, and then filling the right leg and holding that. So we are aware of both of them, and filling the left leg and holding that, and then filling the left arm, and then becoming aware of all four limbs, and then moving up the spine to the skull, and then down the front part of the body to the reproductive organs. This is also, it's similar. So the right arm, right leg, left arm. I know that a few years ago I posted an audio recording, which poor quality. I will redo it at some point. And this is found in the Reality of Being, and it's found elsewhere in the teachings, where you breathe in feeling into the right arm, and then you breathe sensation out into the right leg. You breathe feeling into the right leg, and you breathe sensation out into the left leg, and you breathe feeling in to the left leg, and then breathe sensation out of the right arm, and you circle around doing that. So these are all slightly different variants on the same exercises. And so my goal is to put them out there, and there's slight different variations. So, I mean, it was at the end of the draining exercise, at the end of where you breathe out, you think the word am, you breathe in, and at the end point, or you think the word I, and you breathe in at the end point, you think the word am. And then he leads into this limb moving around. Once you're in a deeply relaxed state and you've cleansed and cleared your body. I just wanted to put it out there just to become aware of the importance of, I mean, even J.G. Bennett, the 60-point exercise, we start with the right arm, and then we go down the right leg, and then we come up the left leg and come up the left arm. So there's that similar limb, right arm, right leg, left arm, similar features. Guido.
I feel some kind of magnetic field around me, connected with the earth, because I started whirling like that.
Okay.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It can happen, eh?
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to create some kind of swirling energetic vortex around our solar plexus. And, I'm going to read the thing that was sent to me a number of times, and, see just, what it does and how it does. Just a second. So, that's my goal, is to share it. And let me just 1 second.
Thank you.
There. I've just shared it with the online group, the entire document. I'm not going to share it online right yet, but it will be there in the messages, so you can read through the entire thing yourself. Okay. Today I was going to talk about considering. Last week I talked about identification. Considering is a dimension, it's an aspect, it's a subset of identification. And here in this quote, Mr. Gurdjieff, this is one of the aphorisms on the study house wall. This is actually aphorism number 1. The chief means of happiness in this life is, I must have translated that wrong, is the ability, the chief means of happiness in this life is the ability to consider externally always, internally never. The difficulty of struggling with identifying occurs when people observe it in themselves and they consider it a very good trait and call it enthusiasm, zeal, passion, spontaneity, inspiration, and names of that kind. and they consider that only in a state of identifying can a man really produce good work. So identification is, and Mr. Gurdjieff said, identification is the chief enemy of self-remembering. And the reason it's the chief enemy of self-remembering is that it uses the same energy. So the energy that we should be devoting to self-remembering, to becoming aware of ourselves here in this moment, consciously looking, listening, smelling, tasting, while sensing our body and perhaps becoming aware of our feelings, to be here now, to remember ourselves here in this moment. This energy gets siphoned away and used in the state of identification. So when we are in that state of identification, we are unable to remember ourselves because we do not have the sufficient and proper energy in order to remember ourselves. And in the last meeting, I went through the process of identification, and I left it just at the point of considering. And today, we talk about considering. Just give me 1 second. So there is still, and this comes from In Search of the Miraculous, page 152, 153. There is still another form of considering, which can take a great deal of energy from a man. And another form of identification. And this form starts with a man beginning to, whoops. I'm sorry, I messed this up. Whoops. Fortunately, I can edit it out. Just give me a second, and this will be edited out from the video, this pause, and just a second. This is not quite so cleaned up and as nice. Whoop, stop sharing here. After general forms of identification, attention must be given to a particular form of identifying, namely identifying with people, which takes the form of considering them. There are several different types of considering. One of the most prevalent occasions, on the most prevalent occasions, a man is identified with what others think about him, how they treat him, what attitudes they show towards him. He always thinks that people do not value him enough, are not sufficiently polite and courteous. All this torments him, makes him think and suspect and lose an immense amount of energy on guesswork, on suppositions, develops in him a distrustful and hostile attitude towards people. How somebody looked at him, what somebody thought of him, what somebody said of him, all this acquires for him an immense significance. And he considers not only separate persons, but society and historically constituted conditions. I'm going to make an aside here. I once met a man who was still upset about the Ottoman Empire sacking, it wasn't Vienna, it was someplace in the Austro-Hungarian Empire over 500 years ago. He was still replaying this battle in his mind, and it had assumed this immense significance. So it was a historical event, that didn't have an effect on his life now, but he was still hurt, still stuck in a state of internal considering over him. So, and he considers not only separate persons, but society and historically constituted conditions. Everything that displeases such a man seems to him to be unjust, illegal, wrong, and illogical. And the point of departure for his judgment is always that these things can and should be changed. Injustice is one of the words in which very often considering hides itself. When a man has convinced himself that he is indignant with some injustice, then for him to stop considering would mean reconciling himself to the injustice. Now, I just want to stop here again. If you've read Mr. Gurdjieff's incredible book, Beelzebub Tales to his grandson. Beelzebub was expelled from the center of the universe because he got caught up in internal considering. He considered that something was being done wrong, that there was something in the way that things were being run that was illogical and unjust. And so he got people to sort of join him in an act of rebellion. And as a result of that, he was cast out from that closer point to the center of the universe, and he ended up in our solar system. So within the story of Tales, that's an aspect where he considered something was being done wrong and it wasn't just, and he had to fix it. So to continue now, there are people who are able to consider not only injustice or the failure of others to value them enough, but who are able to consider, for example, the weather. This seems ridiculous, but is a fact. People are able to consider climate, heat, cold, snow, rain. They can be irritated by the weather, be indignant and angry with it. A man can take everything in such a personal way as though everything in the world had been specially arranged in order to give him pleasure, or on the contrary, to cause him inconvenience and unpleasantness. And I just want to highlight this phrase, a personal way. So it lacks impartiality. It's the subjective me, underlying all of this internal considering is the ego. It's, you know, that's all egocentric. If we really examine it and look at it at its basis, it's personal, it's subjective, it's egocentric. So continuing, all of this and much else besides is merely a form of identification. Such considering is wholly based on requirements. A man inwardly requires that everyone should see what a remarkable man he is, and that they should constantly give expression to their respect, esteem, and admiration for him, for his intellect, his beauty, his cleverness, his wit, his presence of mind, his originality, and all his other qualities. Requirements, in their turn, are based on completely fantastic notions about themselves, such as very often occurs with people of very modest appearance. Various writers, actors, musicians, artists, and politicians, for instance, are almost without exception sick people. And what are they suffering from? First of all, an extraordinary opinion of themselves, and then from requirements, and then from considering, that is, being ready and prepared beforehand to take offense at lack of understanding and lack of appreciation. So let me just stop sharing. So internal considering at its root, as all forms of identification, if you look underneath, all forms of identification, the hidden tentacles of the ego, me, my, mine, wanting to be valued. You know, we want people to pat us on the back. We get upset at injustices because we are so identified. This person who, I forget the battle, it was a 500-year-old battle between the Ottomans and when they were trying to invade Europe and they took over a city. He was upset about this battle that occurred 500 years ago. And he was so identified with his nation, with his self-identity. And yet they've done DNA tests, they've done genetic analysis of people who have lived in the Balkan region, have lived in that zone where there's been a lot of wars between the Ottoman Empire trying to conquer Europe. And they find that they are virtually genetically identical. I have a friend who's a Bosnian. You know, she's got bluish eyes, very blue eyes, very light skin, light hair, but she's Muslim. You know, in terms of our genetic internal identity, you know, the people that he hates and that he considered were his enemies, they probably share a very close ancestry. And yet these ideas, this identification that he had with being a member of this group of people made him feel the pain of a battle that occurred 500 years ago. And we identify all the time. You know, someone looks at us the wrong way and we wonder what we did and, you know, why don't they like us? And they may be thinking about something else completely, but we get so caught up in it. I remember someone telling me that even the lowest beggar looks down upon people. So even the lowest beggar has an inflated ego. And they may look down upon the businessman who has a lot of money because the businessman is trapped in the business world or whatever. These are all forms of identification, all forms of considering. Okay, whoops. Now I'm going to move on to this, which is really what I wanted to talk about today. There is still, and this just leads off from where we were before, there is still another form of considering, which can take a great deal of energy from man. And this form starts with a man beginning to think that he is not considering another person enough, that this other person is offended with him for not considering him sufficiently. And he begins to think himself that perhaps he does not think enough about this other, does not pay enough attention, does not give weight to him enough. All this is simply weakness. People are afraid of one another, but this can lead very far. I have seen many such cases. In this way, a man can finally lose his balance, if at any time he had any, and begin to perform entirely senseless actions. He gets angry with himself and feels that he is stupid, and he cannot stop. Whereas in such cases, the whole point is precisely not to consider. It is the same case, only perhaps worse, when a man considers that in his opinion, he ought to do something, when as a matter of fact, he ought not to do so at all. Ought and ought not is also a difficult subject. That is, difficult to understand when a man really ought and when he ought not. This can be approached only from the point of view of aim. When a man has an aim, he ought to do only what leads towards his aim, and he ought not to do anything that hinders him from going towards his aim. As I've already said, people very often think that if they begin to struggle with considering within themselves, it will make them insincere. And they are afraid of this because they think that in this event they will be losing something, losing a part of themselves. In this case, the same thing takes place as in attempts to struggle against the outward expression of emotions. The sole difference is that in one case, a man struggles with the outward expression of emotions, and in another case, with an inner manifestation of perhaps the same emotions. Okay. But this is a man call. I don't know if we can hear her. Iman. Okay, that's Iman calling. She should try and just give me a second. Can you speak?
Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Can the rest of us hear Iman?
We can hear her too.
You can hear her?
Yes,
I can.
Okay.
we do.
Okay, great. We can hear you, Iman. And Iman is calling from Damascus, Syria. How are you doing, Iman? Okay, so it's wonderful that we can actually connect with you this way rather than me having to do all the weird things that I had to do before in terms of using my tablet and whatever. I'm just going through, I'm just going to finish this bit on considering. Let me share. The fear, of course, the fear of losing sincerity is, of course, self-deception, one of those formulas of lying upon which human weaknesses are based. Man cannot help himself, cannot help identifying and considering inwardly, and he cannot help expressing his unpleasant emotions simply because he is weak. Identifying, considering the expression of unpleasant emotions are manifestations of his weakness, his impotence, his inability to control himself. But not wishing to acknowledge this weakness to himself, he calls it sincerity or honesty and tells himself that he does not want to struggle against sincerity, whereas in fact he is unable to struggle against his weaknesses. Sincerity and honesty are in reality something quite different. What a man calls sincerity in this case is simply being unwilling to restrain himself. And deep down inside him, a man is aware of this, but he lies to himself when he says that he does not want to lose sincerity. So I'm going to, stop there. And I keep on getting these bings, okay. So Georgia D said that, some of the attributes of sleep, amongst them were negative emotions, identification, and the subset of identification, internal considering. And the reason these are all problematic is they all steal the same energy. And if we look at the basis of them, the ego, our sense of self-importance, is at play. And sometimes someone can give us the wrong look and our sense of self-importance is inflamed. How dare they look at me that way? But someone can also look at us the wrong way and our sense of self-importance is like, what did I do wrong? Why didn't they acknowledge me? And we can begin to use it to second guess ourselves. So this is a profound way that we lose and that we leak energy. And it's one of the dominant ways that we leak energy through our daily life. We're either caught up in our negative emotions or we're so identified with ourself, with our ego, with our inward sense of self-importance. And as I said, we can either get upset that someone looked at us bad and how dare they do that, or we can get upset that they looked at us bad and what did I do? Did I do something wrong? Did I offend them? Did I upset them? Did I do something that makes them hate me? Mr. Gurdjieff called the second kind of case, he called those people jump up people. And I love that phrase, jump up people, because they go out of their way to be liked, to have people to think favorably at them, and they second guess themselves. And I know that for myself, that was my bigger problem with internal considering, was that, why don't they like me? What is that? What have I done wrong? How have I offended these people? Where have I stepped on their corn, stepped on their toes? I didn't mean to offend them. So I would, look inside myself and use it sort of to eviscerate myself inwardly. But when I look and when I analyzed it, at the base of that was my own sense of self-importance, my own ego. The ego is not necessarily this I'm a big ego, I'm this. The ego can also be very self-effacing. It's the me, my, egocentric, personalizing, subjective awareness that's different than our objective awareness, our objective sense of self. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff said that one of the ways that we begin to overcome internal considering and the way we begin to fight it is through external considering. And this is where a lot of people have been perplexed. What is external considering? How do we perform external considering? How do we step into that state? I have to say that within my own experience, the best two things that I've learned for external considering was neuro-linguistic programming. In 1989, I became a certified NLP practitioner. I didn't realize that what they were teaching me was a course on external considering. And another important step was becoming a hypnotherapist. Now, hydrogen 24 fuels the state of self-remembering. It is the fuel that underlies mindful awareness. As I've talked about in previous meetings, mindfulness is the first step up from the mechanical state. It's the intermediary state between being in the mechanical state and being in the awakened state. Mindfulness is the correct harnessing and use and application of hydrogen 24. But hydrogen 24 can be siphoned away. And the taste, the difference when it's siphoned away is that beneath it, beneath the misuse of this energy lies the ego, lies the subjectivizing principle, the me, my, mine. So internal considering is a misuse of this energy. It's a stealing of this energy and the lowering of it so that we cannot use it for the proper application, the mindful awareness. And external considering, being aware of someone's facial features, being aware of their eye movements, being aware of their posture, being aware of their body language, being very focused on another person, focused on another person in such a way that you're also maintaining a degree of focus on yourself, so you elicit better reactions, better signals, verbal and nonverbal from the other person, is my understanding of external considering. External considering is where we focus on the other person, where we become aware of the other person and we become aware of how our communication, our body language, what we are doing affects them. And self-remembering at its most basic is the awareness of myself here in this environment. So the awareness of the person I'm talking to and the awareness of myself are two very important qualities in terms of external considering. External considering is actually a form of self-remembering. It's a form of mindful awareness. And with the neurolinguistic programming, NLP, they divide down the middle and then sort of chest high and then ear high and then above. And when people look up, they're generally accessing a visual cue. So if you say, you know, can you imagine what your mother's eyes would look like if they were purple? People will generally look up to the right, but this is slightly different and brains can be rewired. They could also look up to the left. Or can you recall what your mother's eyes look like? And they generally will look up as a memory to the left. So visual parts of our brain, pictures, people look up. When they do something auditory, remember what your mother's voice sounded like. They generally look to the sides, our ears are at the side. And, you know, can you remember what it was like to stroke a Persian cat with long hair? Some kind of sensory kinesthetic thing, they will generally look down. So by focusing on where people are looking, you can get a sense of the areas of their brain that they are accessing. People who tend to be visual also tend to use visual predicates. So people who look up and are visual will say, I see what you mean. It's clear to me. People who are auditory will say, I hear what you're saying. It sounds good. People who are sensory kinesthetic will say, yeah, I can grasp what you're saying. It makes sense to me. I'm not sure where that distortion is coming from on the recording. I may have to do a little bit of filtering out later when I try and upload it. But by paying very careful attention to another person, we can almost get a sense of what they're thinking, where their thinking is coming from. Paying attention to their predicates. Within hypnosis, for instance, we're taught to not look at a person's chest, even though that's where we want to look. When a person breathes in, their shoulders rise. When they breathe out, their shoulders drop. And if you pay mindful attention to someone, if you watch the expressions on their face, if you watch their eye movements, if you pay attention to the micro expressions on their face, if you pay attention to the muscles, the expression, you can get a sense of how your communication is being received. So by becoming more mindful of someone, becoming more aware of them, we can begin to focus a little bit more, not on ourselves, but on them. In one case, I'm not sure where this distortion is coming from. I'll try and filter it out from the ultimate recording. I have a feeling it could be coming from the connection we have with the man. Iman, is there any way that you can mute your microphone? Is there any way you can mute your microphone? I think we're getting a lot of, yeah, we're getting a lot of distortion. In a moment when I ask for comments and everything, yeah, okay, I think it was coming from. No, it seems to have disappeared right now. Okay. So when we focus on someone else, when we focus on the rate of their breathing, when we focus on whether or not they're closed or open, their body language. I also teach people, people who are very shy, who suffer from social anxiety, communication skills. People like people who remind themselves of themselves. And you do not directly mirror a person. If someone is sitting, like this, you don't directly mirror them, but, perhaps you can sit like this and you can subtly mirror them. They move their arm in a wide movement. You can move your arm in a small movement. When you begin to become aware of how other people move and you softly mirror them, you don't do an exact mirroring. They move a big movement, you move a little movement. They lean back, you just lean back ever so slightly. If you begin to softly mirror them, their subconscious mind will go, hey, I like that person. They remind me of me. So paying attention to a person's eye movements, paying attention to the predicates they use, if they're visual, auditory, kinesthetic, paying attention to their posture, their movements, and gently reflecting that back to them. If they speak in a very fast tone and their voice is somewhat clipped, if you can speak sort of in a fast tone with your voice somewhat clipped, just modulating it slightly so it's not like you're directly mirroring them. This is a profound act of mindful awareness. You are actually moving into a state of rapport, into a state of synchronicity with them. And at the subconscious level, they really begin to respond in a very profound way. I've told people that, an exercise that I tried years ago when I was sitting on the subway, I wouldn't look directly at people. I would look and pretend I was looking at the advertisement sort of above their head. But whenever they blinked, I blinked. And when you blink, you can't see. So they would blink and I would blink. They would blink and I would blink. They would blink and I would blink. And after about 1 minute to 2 minutes, you could see their subconscious mind getting more and more irritated, more and more confused, because it's not part of the normal experience and perceptions of the subconscious mind. We generally blink at our own rate. And so the subconscious mind slowly became aware that something was wrong. I wasn't staring at their eyes, I wasn't staring at them, but they couldn't see my eyes shut because they were blinking. Their eyes were shut. And it showed me how powerful the subconscious is in observing what is going on in the environment. We may not be aware of someone blinking, of them breathing, of movement around us. We may be just stuck in, the thoughts in our mind, but the subconscious is aware. It is perceiving all of that at the subconscious level. And so external considering is really focusing on the other person. It's becoming very mindful of the other person, their movement, their body language, their speech, while being mindful of our own movements, our own body language, our own speech, and bringing ourselves into an alignment with them. Now, this is where the idea and the understanding of external considering differs from, say, the way it has been taken by NLP. NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, was started with the premise of modeling behavior. So the people who developed NLP, John Grinder and Richard Bandler, began to model people who demonstrated some kind of excellence. And the two main influences for NLP were the hypnotherapist who developed his own form of hypnosis, Dr. Milton Erickson, a psychiatrist, medical doctor, and an incredibly awake man as far as I could tell. He was able to perceive things. And they broke down what he did. And the other person was Virginia Satir, family therapist and counselor who had this ability to dig deep into issues and bring them to light. And they initially developed this and thought it was going to help therapists. And it really does help therapists. It's so essential in the work that I do to be so mindful of my clients, their words, their pacing, what they're saying, how they're accessing it. But unfortunately, the therapists kind of ignored it, and the sales people got involved with NLP, and they took it and they ran with it. So, you know, someone walks into the car dealership and you try to figure out what their dominant representational system is, and you begin to mirror them in a subtle way so that you can develop that rapport with them so you can sell them on a car. Tony Robbins, you know, NLP, you know, achieving your dreams and, you know, having the lifestyle and all of that. That's where it differs from my understanding of external considering. Because external considering, you know, the salespeople, it's used by the ego for egocentric, for subjective reasons. So in NLP, they talked about uptime. Uptime is where you really focus on the other person and you become very aware of the other person and you become aware of how your communication influences the other person. And in therapy, it's done properly to achieve therapeutic goals, to help the person become a better person and to heal them. When it was taken over by sales, it was taken over by the ego and that I want money and I want sales. In the Gurdjieffian sense, it's to develop this mindful awareness of our communication. And we should not use it in an egocentric way. We should not use it to manipulate people, but rather to make people more comfortable, to make them more receptive, more open. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff did this. A lot of people think that Mr. Gurdjieff yelled at everyone and that he was could be this nasty person. But for most people, the majority of people that Mr. Gurdjieff encountered, they actually thought he was a saint. Only those people who basically said to Mr. Gurdjieff, "Can I be your student?" And then he said, "Sure," and he pulled them into the whirling hurricane. And he would, you know, yell at them and do various things in order for them to not get identified with themselves and to move into that place where I'm acting, not reacting. So with his own students, it was like you were put into this crucible by Mr. Gurdjieff, where he applied such forces and pressure to kind of refine all the darkness out of you to the point where you could be unaffected by his tirade. And the moment you were unaffected by his tirades and everything, he would stop. And Michel Conjé, Dr. Conjé would say at that point, he would just repeat, and stop. But for the rest of the world, for the people that Mr. Gurdjieff encountered on the streets, in his business dealings and all of that, he was very perceptive of the effect he had on them. And rather than come at them from his own perspective of self-importance, wanting to be, you know, looked up at, wanting to people to pat him on the back, wanting people to recognize how good he was, how noble, how important, his focus was on them, was on making sure that his communication, that what he did in relation to them uplifted them. It wasn't about me, and that subjective, egocentric patting ourselves on the back. It was to help those people. So any questions, Iman, if you can come back on, take the mute off now, Iman. Any questions, any comments? So, I mean, for instance, I could be like, Ian, I could, my arms, even though yeah, that's okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you think
Okay, Ben.
Oh.
Well, okay, Ben, ask a question. Yeah.
Okay. I guess so in terms of that, do you know of any like organizations that still kind of like do that, where they kind of like try to break you down? And I don't know. It sounds like maybe like even going into like the military or some type of training like that can be like beneficial to
I don't recommend Landmark at all, but that's what they try to do.
Mhm.
Landmark came for Werner Eckhart. It started out as EST, and they really want to break you down, but I do not recommend Landmark. But if you wanted to, but they charge a lot of money, and then they want to try and recruit you for no money, and so that you become one of their volunteers, and they try to break you down. But I don't recommend that. A lot of people stopped doing that after Mr. Gurdjieff died because they didn't have the understanding. One of his students said, Mr. Gurdjieff, you break people. And then he looked at them and said, yes, but I know how to put them back together. So unless you know how to put people back together, that mulching of your personality, I don't fully agree with that.
Right.
But, in terms of learning just to be mindful of your reactions and how your reactions affect other people. So you begin to learn how to act rather than react. Internal considering, identification is all reacting. It's not acting. When we begin to externally consider, when we begin to become more mindful, we learn to act rather than react. So Mr. Gurdjieff would, this onslaught on people, and they would react. And when they stopped reacting, and they found that stillness within themselves, then they began acting. And that's what he was trying to teach them. So they stopped doing that. A lot of his students stopped doing that because they didn't have he could read a person within 5 minutes. He could tell people about themselves in ways that the rest of us cannot understand. I always say the great library of Alexandria burned down twice. First in the 4th century, and then when Mr. Gurdjieff died, the amount of knowledge that he had, the understanding that he had. I don't think we will have that ourselves, but he left us with enough that we didn't need him. He was an exceptional being. He had an exceptional mission. He came to plant teachings in a very hostile soil, a very rocky and barren soil, and then he spent 30 years tending that soil, and I think he did an admirable job. But it was a very difficult one.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? Comments? You've done some therapy, helping people, talk therapy, right, Ian? Have they taught you these skills, or did you notice it, when you've done sort of one-on-one with people?
Yeah, I do. I've done a little bit of coaching. There's definitely some there's been taught to keep your attention on the other person and also on yourself. That kind of two-way thing.
Yeah.
The specific mirroring, we didn't really talk about that. I'm a little uncomfortable with all that because, as you said, it so often gets used for sales. So that the whole aspect of things, they may have taught it and I just didn't take it in. But I don't remember that specifically. It's much more just about feeling into the body, remembering that you're present, but keeping your attention on the other person and letting, what comes out of that come out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem that, some of this information can be abused. And people do abuse that. And, groups for a long time, this information has the potential to be abused. And therefore, we should not talk about it. We should just keep it confined within our own physical groups, except, Tony Robbins, NLP, it's all out there. Everything that I'm talking about. And it's not something that you can easily acquire. It's something that needs to be practiced. And salespeople, they go to sales workshops and they are being trained in this left, right, and center. When we actually become aware of it, we can become aware of salespeople attempting to use it against ourselves. And then you can do various things. This information is out there. It's like, trying to shut the barn door after the cow has escaped. The people who want to manipulate people, they have learned this. The people at the top of the real estate chain have learned this, and the new people coming in as real estate agents are all pointed towards these programs and towards these things. So for more of us to become aware of it is sort of to empower us as well. So yeah, you're right in terms of it can be used in an improper way, and it is being used. I think in the context of the Gurdjieff teachings, when we understand that this is an act of mindfulness, and then when we understand that the biggest distortion and the biggest weakness and the leaking of our energy and the thing that prevents us from it stepping up into the mindful state and then stepping up into the awakened state is the ego. The ego underlies all forms of identification, all forms of internal considering. All of that is that me, my, mine, what's in it for me? And the ego is not necessarily grasping, clawing. The ego can appear very self-effacing, like, what did I do wrong? Why don't they like me? That's also an egocentric reaction. We think of ego as really trying to grasp. But the ego is really putting ourselves in a prominent position. It's the me, my, mine subjective way of connecting and dealing with people. And we've got to step beyond that. I was actually talking with Ben about this on Friday, the difference between subjective and objective consciousness. Objective consciousness is this awareness without the ego. It's without that subjectivizing principle. Terms Mr. Gurdjieff used, one that I highlighted in the text I was quoting, was personal. The opposite of that is impersonal. Another term that he used was partial versus impartial. So we've got to develop an impartial awareness. When we have a partial awareness, when we have a personal awareness, when we have a subjective awareness, underneath that is the ego. And it is the ego that is really responsible for all of the manifestations that keep us asleep, except for the formatory thinking and the excessive movements in our body. But things such as identification, considering negative emotions, lying, and lying, we can lie when we don't even think we're lying. We just pretend we know, or we were acting like we know more than we know. Yes. Well, I think that they should have done this when they were there, talking about politicians or policies or whatever, claiming that we know far more than we really do know. And that, again, is the sense of self-importance. It's the ego. So underlying all of these things are the tentacles of the ego. So we got to use these powers for good, the dark villains are out there, and you walk into a car sales showroom and they've probably already been trained in this. Salespeople latched right onto it. And the other group, there were two groups that really latched onto it. First were the salespeople, and then the second was the PUA, the pickup artist community. And the more that we ourselves are conscious of this, particularly if we're good human beings, we don't want to misuse this, the more we can begin to realize what they're doing. So you start doing this when you're in a car showroom and you see the person doing that, and you can kind of play with it if you want, and just get it so that they don't really know who you are or what you are. That's actually externally considering and realizing that they are trying to do something to you. They're trying to manipulate you and using it against them. But we have to become like this empty vessel. When empty of the ego, empty of that sense of me, my, mine. and relate to the world, relate to other people. So when you are at a coffee shop and the person in the coffee shop serving you is a bit grumpy, and it's like, how dare they be grumpy to me? You know, I'm important, I'm a customer. What are they, you know, rather than going from that egocentric perspective, to flip it and to focus on them. And, you know, I guess you're having a bit of a rough day, and we can be real nasty, you know, on this side when we haven't had our caffeine. And you can really externally consider them, and you can help them. I've studied dialectical behavior therapy. Marsha Linehan, the person who developed DBT, said that sometimes when she was caught up in such a state, in the middle of the night, she would drive to a 7-Eleven or a store that was open 24 hours a day just to compliment the clerk. And, oh, it's so nice that you're here in the middle of the night. It must be hard on your social life. And she would, in a sense, externally consider. So, you know, when someone treats you badly, when the bus driver's grumpy at you, or the person doesn't appreciate you enough, when you walk into a store or whatever, that's just inflaming your ego. And we can flip it around. We can connect with the other person. We can externally consider them and control our own reaction so that we leave them feeling good and we uplift them ever so slightly. I'm almost out of time. There was an exercise that Mr. Gurdjieff taught C.S. Knott. It's in a pupil's journey, and it's where Mr. Gurdjieff said, you know, look at your fellow man, realize that they are going to die, that you are going to die. He said that this was a way of assimilating the active elements in the air, another way than conscious breathing. Recognize that they live in this sort of illusion, this delusion, and to be very considerate of them, to focus on them, rather than to try to control them, to try to manipulate them, to realize the terror of the situation. C.S. Knott didn't use that word, but for most people, for all of us, it's the terror of the situation. We don't realize what's going to happen and how every moment of inattention is something that we will never get back. And so this awareness of the other person, this awareness, this focusing on the other person and wanting to leave them feeling better, wanting to leave them feeling good about themselves, not wanting to make them think what a wonderful person I am or how smart or intelligent or knowledgeable I am, but to make them feel good about themselves, to make them comfortable, so to speak. Any other questions quickly? Just, we've run out of time. No. Think about this, try to think, externally considering, try to focus on it as an act of mindful awareness. You're very mindful of the other person and an act of self-remembering, and very mindful of yourself, and that what you say and how you move and how you act affects them. And what you say and how you move and how you act will be ultimately reflected back in the way they communicate and act with you. And try and do it in such a way that you leave them feeling good about themselves, that you leave them in a positive state, focusing on them, not on yourself, not because you want them to like you or any of the egocentric concerns, but just purely objectively focusing on them. Okay, thank you for coming today. Okay, Iman, if you can stay on the line, just because you're on a different line. Okay, bye now.
Bye again.
Bye-bye.